Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Boy, we got a great variety of guests on the show today, but I'm especially honored to have with us today Dr. Michael George. He's an author and a nationally recognized motivational speaker. He holds his doctorate degree in theology from Andersonville Theological Seminary, which is no easy task. And he's a member of the board of directors of Freedom Congress. And Dr. George, what an honor to have you, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Well, you've written an interesting book, to say the least, and we want to get into this, America's Everyday Patriots. And what moved you down this track?
Well, the book, of course, is titled My Story of America,
right.
Inspirational Stories of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. And it really came about from people I met when I was traveling the nation speaking. I realized that there are just ordinary citizens among us that have great life stories, extraordinary stories, that all really tie into life and liberty and faith and freedom.
You know, just kind of building off that theme just for a minute, Dr. George, it appears to me, even in the shadow of the chaos that we're living and seeing what happened in Congress or didn't happen in Congress last night, I've often said, you know what? The soul of America is still good. The systems are broken.
You know, it's very true. It's funny because I am actually in Washington, D.C. today. And
the lights are on.
Yeah. Last night I was down at the Capitol, and we were doing some filming for a documentary that's being done, and I'm retelling the story of the national anthem, and crowds began to gather around as they heard the story of Francis Scott Key and the bombing of Fort McHenry, and when I get to the part where I'm sharing about, you know, the rocket's red glare and the bombs bursting in air, you can see tears running down people's eyes. And when people remember the stories of America, it makes a tremendous impact on their lives. And that's really how the book came about, is I wanted people to know the stories of America. Ordinary stories, extraordinary stories.
Why do you think these things are forgotten? Why do you think we have somehow just skipped over them, thought we could do without them?
I don't know if it's a direct, some part of that people want to make a change fundamentally in how the nation is set up, or if people just get apathetic or lazy at times. I think that can happen as well. Because there's a period of my life where I really was not interested in some of the stories of America. And I realized that our history is rich. But not only is our history rich, but the people that are around us, who live around us, they have rich histories. For example, one of the gentlemen I interviewed in the book, he grew up in communist East Germany. In fact, he was a communist. But when he left the Communist Party, he began to be followed by the secret police, the Stasi. They began to monitor his phone calls, read all of his mail. In fact, in one portion of the book, he tells about holding onto his wife and his 2 children, trying to pull them into the embassy as the communist officials are trying to rip the kids out of his arms. But he comes here and says that this is the land of liberty and freedom. And if we lose it, where else in the world can you go? Wow.
Well, let's get into some of these stories. Of course, you just shared one. Where did you find them?
You know, I found them simply by asking people, hey, do you know of anyone that has an interesting story? And someone would say, yes, I know of somebody. And I would interview them. And that's how it came about.
Well, let's get into them. I'm sure you're loaded with favorites, but let's talk about maybe the Vietnam vet whose life was changed by the unshakable faith of his children that were threatened.
Well, the first story in the book is a gentleman that grew up in a very, very difficult home life. His father was a German atheist. His mother was a spiritualist from an Indian reservation. And she used to carry around a little bag of chicken bones that she would roll and try and tell the future. At age 7, him and his older brother was getting beat up by their oldest brother, and they actually pulled a shotgun off the mantle and shot their older brother in the legs. He lived, but this is the home life that the man grew up in. His life changed when he went to Vietnam. When he was walking through the jungles one day in a monsoon in Vietnam, he steps in a bombed out building, and over in the corner he finds a Gideon's New Testament. He picks that up, puts it in his pocket, takes it back to his grass hut and begins to read, as he said, all the way to Palms 28, because that's the way he thought it was pronounced. But he eventually becomes a missionary that goes behind the Iron Curtain. And the stories that he shares about kids whose fathers were taken away because they preached the gospel is quite incredible. In fact, one boy was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the boy said, I want to be a preacher just like my daddy. And he said, do you realize that if you do that, you'll end up in prison? And the little boy said this. He said, I know that the heroes in the Western world are men that play with little rubber balls like basketballs and footballs. Mm. But my heroes are Joshua at Jericho, Moses at the Red Sea. But most importantly, my hero is my daddy. And if it means going to jail like he did, so be it. Wow.
Now, there's obviously, in your stories, there is the element of faith and how it changes and motivates people. And that has to be incredibly inspiring.
It really is. And I tell people all the time, the book is a combination of faith plus freedom equals liberty. I was sitting this morning at the Family Research Council with General Jerry Boykin, who endorsed the book, and we were just talking a little bit about it. And I said, that's what makes up America, where you can openly have faith and you can openly have freedom, then you have liberty. When you strip those things out, you lose your liberty. And every story in the book ties around that. Every person, every individual. The great thing about the book, Perry, is that all demographics are really covered. I mean, there's stories of immigrants. There's stories of people that were born here. There's all colors of the rainbow. It's really a great picture of America.
How has this changed you in your thinking and in your walk, Michael?
I can tell you, sitting in front of those people and listening to their stories made me realize the hidden heroes and patriots that walk among us. It's interesting. The book starts with a Vietnam veteran and it ends with one as well. And this gentleman, I asked him, I said, what did you learn in Vietnam? And he said, well, I learned this more than anything. He said, we went there as strangers. We had our different denominational backgrounds. We had our different prejudices, but we left there as brothers. We came as Texans, New Yorkers, and West Virginians, but we came back just as Americans. And that really struck me at the thought of, when this country was founded, you had all the different colonies that were fighting for what they wanted. At a core, they came together and said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I met people that really live and believe that's what America should be.
It appears that there are, and I want you to highlight some more stories here in a minute, but it appears there are stories like this by the thousands out there. But what's alarming to me is that there seems to be a movement in this country to take away religious freedoms, which in turn would take away the liberty and the freedom that we so enjoy. Why don't you think we hear these voices louder than we do today?
It's kind of the bully pulpit. You're aware that celebrities, news media, politicians, they're only a small percentage of what make up America. But yet, that kind of control, you can really, dictate and move and get people to believe that this is the norm. It reminds me of the story of Sonia in the book. Sonia was a girl that grew up in Nuremberg, Germany, Nazi Germany. And at age 10, she was required to become a member of the Hitler Youth. Even though her parents weren't Nazis, she had to be, because that's what the requirement was. And the Nazis did a very good job of separating the children from their parents in the educational environment. So Sonia was brought up to believe that Hitler was the savior. That's what they were teaching them. They taught these children to sing songs of praise to him, that he would help them, he would fight for them, he would be the person that they always needed to look to, and that their parents, you know, they needed to report them if they weren't following Hitler. So when Sonia got older, her father really, you know, took a chance and pulled her aside, and he began to explain to her what Adolf Hitler was doing to the Jews and to the people, and she was devastated. So when she actually finds out the truth, and she wants to leave the Hitler Youth, but she can't, and her story is so compelling, and it really makes you realize what happens when people constantly are fed a propaganda. She told me that, you know, they were, you know, Hitler and them always said, you know, give us the children and we will change the world. You know, we don't need the parents, just give us the children. And so it's something that we need to realize as we go about our day. You know, what are we sharing with our children? What are we making sure, you know, they're influenced by?
Where's Sonia today?
Sonia actually lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. She came to America, became a citizen, and what's interesting, she's a dear woman. She will tell you, I'm 150% American. I'm hyphenated nothing. I'm not German hyphenated American. I'm just American. She loves that she's from Germany, but the fact what I really love is she says, we're just Americans. That's what we are. We're not hyphenated something. We're Americans. So I think it's very interesting that how she sees it.
Let me take a quick break here. Dr. George will be back with Dr. Michael George and the book that he's authored, My Story of America, Inspirational Stories of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. There's a picture of it on the screen for those watching on the Dove TV. Check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon. We'll be right back. Anyway, Dr. Michael George is back with us today, and he's the author of a great book called My Story of America, Inspirational Stories of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. There's a picture up there on the screen, and let me encourage you to check it out with Barnes & Noble online at Amazon. Dr. George, you know, a couple things here. I understand that you use lyrics from the Star-Spangled Banners as chapter themes?
Absolutely, and it's really, the book's going to be one of two books, but I use that in particular because behind everything, there's a great story. Even behind the Star-Spangled Banner, there is a great story. I got to travel this summer to your great state of Oregon. It had been my first trip out there. And I was actually in Salem at the Salem Volcanoes baseball game over the 4th of July. And they had invited me out to speak. And right before the first pitch was thrown, I came out to home plate and retold the story of the national anthem before thousands of people sitting there in the stands. And you could watch people just get it. They remembered the story, or maybe they didn't know the story, but you could watch the tears run down their eyes as I tell about the bombing of Fort McHenry, and when that morning comes and Francis Scott Key looks out and he sees the flag still flying over the ramparts. It's a powerful story, and it has an impact, and that's what led to the writing of the national anthem. The people in the book, their stories have an impact, and it's one of those things I get asked all the time. Why? What can I do? What can I do to help keep America a land of freedom, a land of liberty? And I thought about that, and it was really one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wanted to be able to have something that people could share with their friends, their neighbors. It's a great witnessing tool. It's one of those things that you can give as a gift, like this holiday season, that people will thank you for and say, where else can I get this? It's just that powerful. The stories are that powerful.
Well, you've tapped into something that is very impacting, and that is storytelling. And you know, Jesus did it, and I think today, if more and more people, they can. The best thing I've heard is said, you need to go through the heart to get to the head. If you go through the head, you'll never get to the heart. But you need to go through the heart with a story, an emotional connection that opens up the brain to receive the truths that you're trying to communicate. Also in there, you talk about the first American Christians and their fight for religious freedom. Tell us about that.
Not sure where you're referencing in the book.
But in general, excuse me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, really, what we've got is this. you've got stories in the book of people that, all throughout the book, I weave through little bits and pieces of people that fought for America in the beginning. Stories of, for example, John Adams in there tells about how, liberty once lost is lost forever. There's quotes in there from our founders, bits and pieces throughout the entire book. But it's one of those things where you're right. You have to go through the heart to get to the mind. When you've sat in a church service at any time in your life and you've watched people, you see them, maybe kind of go in and out as the facts and the figures are delivered. But as soon as they start delivering a story, start telling a story, everybody perks up and they listen. And they walk out of that church remembering that story. And I wanted to intertwine some of the stories of America, bits and pieces, into the stories of the book.
Well, give us a couple more. We got a few moments here. I don't know where to go. You got so many of them. But do you have a favorite?
Probably one of my favorites would be the story of Anna. Anna was a young girl that grew up in Cuba, and she tells what it was like just to live there and about her daddy and who she really loves. And then when the communist revolution took over, she tells how their life totally changed. She tells about how they ended up having to flee the country, and there's stories in there about how her father had to secretly get out of the country. They left there with just the clothes on their back, and they came to America. And she tells stories about doctors and lawyers fleeing that land and coming here and waiting tables and working as janitors so they could learn the language to become American citizens. And the thing I like is she just shares about how she got an opportunity. And even though she misses her homeland, what use is there to live in a place where you have no freedom, you have no liberty? We should never take that for granted. We should fight for that. We should be willing to stand up for that. And that's what encourages me. There are people out there willing to do that. And that's why I want to spread it. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. It's a great thing to get and give to people to share liberty.
All right. What about the World War II veteran who was awarded the Medal of Honor? Tell us that one.
This gentleman, Woody, it's interesting. He grew up in the backwoods of West Virginia, where I'm from, actually. And he ends up fighting at Iwo Jima in World War II. Originally, Woody couldn't even get into the Marines because he was too short. He was only 5'6", and it wasn't until in 1943 when they lowered the requirements that he could even get into the Marines. But he actually believed that he was going to stand on the coast of California with a rifle and dare them to try and come take our nation. That's what he believed. When they told him, no, you're going to the Pacific, he was like, what's the Pacific? I'm not sure what you're talking about. But his story is very compelling because he tells about, here he had to kill people that he never had ever met before, that had really never done anything to him personally. And he struggled with that for some time. And he really shares about what happened in his life to give him peace, to get him past this, these episodes of PTSD. It is a compelling story that will help. If you have a veteran in your life that has struggled with things, this is a great story to get and share with them.
All right, and you also have a story in there about a couple of criminals.
Yes, two gentlemen I met, they're actually from Texas. They grew up in two different parts of the country. The one gentleman, he grew up, and it'd be hard to call them gentlemen at that time in life. They certainly are now. But when they first grew up, the one was a drug user and became a drug dealer by the age of 15.
Wow.
The other one had lived a good life, but when he got into college, he got going the wrong way, and he ended up stealing $230,000. So you have a thief and a drug dealer meeting up in federal prison, both with long sentences. And through just nothing else you could say but the providence of God, they meet, their lives get changed, they end up getting out. They have a music group where they tour the nation today, sharing their story with others and telling people about the dangers of what they got into. It's a great story of second chance, a story of grace.
Wow. Well, Michael, you say you got another one coming out?
We are working. This one has only been out about 3.5, maybe 4 weeks. And if you, like you said, you mentioned the chapter titles. This one ends, or the ramparts we lost were so gallantly streaming. Wow. So the next book will pick up. The chapter will be "And the Rocket's Red Glare." So I'm interviewing people right now who have some interesting stories. There's actually a place where people can go to the website, mystoryofamerica.com, and send me a message and say, hey, I might have an interesting story you might be interested in.
All right, so I was going to ask you that. Are you looking for stories? So they can go to
mystoryofamerica.com.
Okay, and kind of send you their little brief, huh?
Absolutely. Then we can go from there.
Well, boy, you got some great material to preach from. You know.
Well, there should be several preachers that could get it and use it. I'll tell you what. I was in a church this past weekend sharing some stories, and you will be amazed at how God moves through the stories of people's lives. The great thing is, and I had a woman tell me this weekend, she said, I'm buying 5 of these books because there are 5 people that I want to witness to, that these stories will witness to them in a way that I'll never be able to. That's powerful.
Has it reassured your faith in America, getting these kind of stories?
Absolutely. When you get down to the everyday citizen and make this country what they are, it does assure me. It does reassure me. And we just have to get people motivated and inspired to be willing to, take the fight where we need to.
Well, Dr. George, thank you for your time. It's fascinating, and I look forward to getting you back, especially when your second edition comes out. But let me encourage you to check it out. You may, like he said, this would make a terrific Christmas gift, and it's called My Stories of America, Inspirational Stories of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness by Dr. Michael T. George. And you may want to get a copy of that at Amazon or online at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble. Thank you, Dr. George. Keep up the good work. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. God bless. We'll be right back.